Hello, everyone. I just want to welcome you back to my channel. It has been quite a bit of time since I have created a video, and I've never done a segment just like this one, but I am so incredibly excited to have an art conversation with my studio manager and my friend, Sarah Lourenco. And we are actually going to be discussing what is the message behind your art and why is it even important to have a deeper and better understanding of what the message is behind your art and how it affects everything in your art business. And Sarah and I have been working with each other for a little bit over 2 years now, which is really exciting. And we often get caught up in all of these art conversations that we have about art and how to support artists because we both have businesses that support artists in their creative endeavors, in selling their artwork, and everything related to an art business. And so we are so excited to start this awesome new series and hopefully give you all of you some tools to become more successful and thriving in your art business. And so with that, I'm just going to go ahead and let Sarah introduce herself. And if you want to tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do and why you think this is important to have this conversation.
Oh, wonderful. Well, hello, everybody. It is really, truly an honor to be here talking with Wendy. Like she said, we always get into these really good conversations, and we thought, wow, this would be so good if other artists could listen in and hear about the conversations that we have. So, a little bit about me. I am an artist as well. I graduated with an art degree in 2011, so many years ago. I had my career as an independent artist, and I fell in love with the business side of art, the entrepreneurial aspects of it. So, pretty much since COVID, I started mentoring artists, and then I decided that not only did I want to mentor, I just wanted to be more hands on. So, I started a business where I do business management for artists, so I can go in and help in every need that they have so that artists can stay in their realm of creating more than just managing the business. So that's what I do today, and I've been working with Wendy. It's been a little over 2 years now. It's crazy how time flies. And it's been
Yes.
great. And I love that we're talking about this because we kind of come from different angles. Like in working with artists, like Wendy, you're much more in touch with artists on their creative side and technique and expression, and the art message is there as well. And I come more from it from a business side of how can you use your art message to leverage your sales and make like authentic sales on that. So I'm really excited to see this conversation because we're really targeting from different angles, but I think it's valuable.
Right. I'm really excited because I've been teaching online art classes since 2017. And for the most part, I actually started by teaching technique art classes. And over the last, I don't know, few years, I've discovered that artists really need a lot more mentorship in finding their own style, but also, like you were saying, in the business side of things. And so 2 years ago, I started a mentorship program called Masterpiece Makers. And I've been working with artists now for, a long time. And I feel like whenever I mention this idea of what is the message behind your art, artists often get this like deer in the headlights expression. Like, what are you talking about? And I have like no clue what you're talking about, right?
Mhm.
And so I personally have experienced this in my own creative career. in that when I am able to clearly communicate why I am making the art that I'm making, it always translates to more sales and
Mhm.
to more connection with my audience,
Yeah.
which is so key for any artist's career. And
Mhm.
so I think what I was able to do successfully from the beginning of my business was I was constantly telling a story about my art and about my life experience and why I made art and what I like, just sharing the journey with people, right? And I think what Sarah and I are going to get to dive into is there is something really magical about that connection that you can make with your audience and your ideal customer, where the more that you are able to communicate what the message is behind your art, the easier it is for your audience to make those connections. I really quickly, before we get started into the questions, I just want to acknowledge that it's not automatic that you know the answer to this. And so many artists struggle with that. That I always think of the Georgia O'Keeffe quote where she said, I found I could say things with art and color that I couldn't say any other way. Things that I had no words for. And so, what we are doing in this process of establishing the message behind our art is we are having to put words to what we're actually doing on the canvas, right? And so, hopefully, after listening to our video today, you will have some really great questions to start asking yourself around this topic. What else do you have to add, Sarah?
Well, I just want to say that as we were outlining like how we're going to approach this topic, we kind of divided in 4 segments just to make sure that we make a very comprehensive flow in the conversation. So for the audience, for you to know, like we're first going to be talking about like what is an art message, how do you discover it, how do you communicate it, and then common challenges of having a message, whether profound, whether not, how do you put that out in the world. So that's kind of like the order of that we're going to be following and covering this topic. And I think just starting with the basics, I think we can start by talking about like what is a message.
Right.
So do you want to start, Wendy? For you, like what would you define as an art message?
Oh man, now I feel like I'm on the spot. Like,
Throwing you in the deep end already.
here we go. No, I just feel like it does go back to what is it that you feel compelled to say through your art making, right?
Perfect. Yeah.
And why I think oftentimes it always goes back to that original, like almost origin story of why you started making art in the first place. And I think that it is so deeply personal to
Mhm.
every single artist. I don't know anyone who has the exact same story or the exact same message, right?
Mhm.
And I also will say that sometimes it takes a long period of time to even figure out what that is. So I guess that's, I don't know, does that even answer the question?
I,
It's
yes.
what another way to think about it would be maybe like, what is the theme of your art making?
Mhm.
And I find personally when I can even just identify an emotion
Mhm.
as tied to my art making, that actually really helps me identify and helps other artists identify more of what the message is behind their art. So did that
I love
answer the
it.
question?
That did actually very well. I mean, for me, you already nailed it in the first sentence. You're like,
Oh,
what
okay.
compels you to create art? I was like, done. Like, why even talk more? But then you added a few other elements because I think a message is multifaceted. So it is your reason why. And I love what you said. It is true. I am yet to find two artists that have the same story. Like, in regards to like their relationship with art because it's very personal and it's very organic. So
Right.
as an artist, I do think like the message firstly is like what compels you to make art and to want to share it. And then it's also like, is it identifying an emotion for it? I like to think of the message because the word message is sharing a communication. It's not just
Right.
isolated to one person. There's literally a dynamic of sharing. And I remember reading once a quote from C.S. Lewis, the author of the Chronicles of Narnia, and he says that friendship, the minute a friendship is born is when one person exclaims, "Wow, me too." And when
Yeah.
you're able to make that relatability, you're like, oh, there's a similarity there. So an art message is you just first like, what's the emotion that compels you? Like your life story. Was it an event that happened in your life and you're processing that through art? Or maybe it is a topic that you feel so connected to. Maybe it's political, maybe it's relational, maybe it's intellectual, maybe it's just emotional and you just need to get it out. But then you pour it as a visual message and people look at it and they're like, oh, me too. So I think that's a
Yeah.
message.
I also was just thinking while you were talking that our art making is like having a conversation, right?
Yeah.
And the more that you can see that you're having almost a conversation with yourself, right? But when you share it out into the world, then you give other people the opportunity to interact with that conversation, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it would be interesting if we both shared sort of what the message is behind both of our art, right?
Love that. Yeah.
Because if we're telling other artists to do this for themselves, we should have to do it for
I
ourselves
agree.
too.
I agree.
Like,
Start with
because we're like,
yourself.
you should do this, right? And so, and I think that sometimes, especially for me, since I've been doing this for a long time, I started my creative business and practice back in 2010. I think that sometimes I just automatically assume that everyone who follows me knows what the message is behind my art making. And so sometimes I forget to communicate it on a regular basis with my audience. And I will say that the more that you practice this and the more that you make yourself vulnerable in this way, the easier that it gets. What's the quote that you told me? Something breeds, oh man, I
Frequency
can't,
breeds familiarity.
what was the first word?
Frequency.
Frequency breeds familial, can't even say that.
Familiarity.
Familiarity. Words are not working for me right now. So I'll go first.
Hence
And
why you're an artist. You're paint.
I paint. Words are like, blah, 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 yeah. No, but I do communicate a lot. So I
Mm-hmm.
should be able to communicate. So I feel like because when I started my creative practice, I was, I actually had a traumatic brain injury. And so for me, the life event for me was my traumatic brain injury, and my art making was the really the therapy to pull me out of that life event. And I found that when when I started my creative practice, that honestly having this this practice of art making really allowed me to really heal from that trauma. One of the things that I feel like really was the message early on in my art making was to find beauty in the everyday moments. And so that was one thing. And then also, I feel like another theme is just something having to do with like color and I don't know, like the joy that I find through color and that whole healing process. I haven't really spent a lot of time talking about that specific theme or message, but I feel like yeah, finding beauty in the everyday moments. And then also just this sense of joy, which you find through my color palette. So
Mhm.
I don't know if
Yeah.
communicated that clearly, but yeah, for me, it's definitely been a healing process. Oh, and the other piece was, when I first started, I did more like abstract work, and then I came into the florals, right?
Mhm.
And I do feel like the flowers are really just about almost like the fleeting nature of beauty, right? If we're not enjoying flowers, their beauty is so fleeting. They're here one moment and then gone the next, right?
Yes. I remember one of the things that compelled me to reach out to you for us to work together, I was like fingers crossed, was because I had been following you, but I read about your story and I thought that was so impactful that you used art as a means to heal from something so traumatic. And yeah, actually, I think even before we talked, I had a feeling that your use of botanicals was very much to express temporary things that are temporary, but that are so beautiful. And
Yeah.
I think you shared with me once that you either had a collector or a student that said, wow, whoever sees your art and knows you as a person sees a perfect correlation, because that is true. Like your artwork is the perfect personification of you,
Aw,
and
thank you.
it talks so
Well,
much about your
the
story.
compliment that she gave me was I showed her some of my art and she goes, "It's you, but on
Yeah.
canvas."
That's right. That's right. That's what it was. I
Yeah.
think that's like a high compliment for an artist. And
Yeah.
I would say that's like when we look into message, and then we'll get into the depth of message later, but the message is just an extension of an artist's intellectual property. Like it's just who you are as a person, how you think, and I think translating the authenticity of who you are is the end goal. But it does take time, like you said. My personal journey was also a slow development because, being introspective, even being a person, we're all very multifaceted. So it's even hard to like, what really is feeding my art? What aspect of me feeds into my art? And what do I want to share? What do I want to hide and keep personal? And you're like doing this curation and trying to understand yourself. And what comes first? Am I like, does my art dictate what is internally something that I need to discover about myself? Or do I already know who I am and I'm just trying to externalize it on canvas? So I actually, mine was this one where I had an inclination to art already, to like how I liked to draw. For whoever knows my art, I do mostly illustrations. It's more figurative with people that are very quirky looking. So I like I like to play around bad postures or, just a very whimsical feel. And then I tried to realize like, why am I drawn to that? And then my take, like the light bulb moment, was because I feel like a lot of my life story is things not working out, but just because they didn't work out doesn't mean that there's not beauty to my trajectory, to my journey. So I like to portray in my art unconventional beauty, maybe something that you wouldn't objectively look at it and be like, oh my gosh, that's gorgeous, which is beautiful, but mine has a little plot twist to it. And I think that's
Yeah.
how I define my art. The message of my art is unconventional beauty, where it's one of those things that you have to take a look and learn to appreciate it. Or maybe that expression, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Maybe it's not for everyone, but it's in who
Yeah.
sees it and it's personal. And it has everything to do with my life story, which I would say, like, the wonderful thing about your art message is when people try to say, oh, it's not good enough, or if they have an opinion about it. I mean, technically it's subjective, like because it's your life story, it's how you see things.
Right.
So I think that's how it goes. I am curious to know, Wendy, like when you discovered your message, like how important did it become to start for your business, for like sharing that with an audience, with your collectors?
Yeah, I'm trying to even think back because for me, talking about my car accident and my brain injury while talking about my art making and my art process, it was so intertwined for me
Mm.
because part of my healing was actually in telling the story.
Mm.
Does that make sense? So I can never remember a time when I wasn't telling a story with my art because I was
Okay.
like that was just always a given for me
Mm.
unless you go back before my car accident, right?
Interesting. Okay.
When I was young, my mom had put me in all sorts of art classes, and I had even taken several drawing courses in high school. And I was able to do very realistic pencil drawings back then, but I
Yeah.
never really considered myself an artist,
Mm.
right? It wasn't until that life event where I had to use my creative practice to process my emotions and to process what had happened in my life that I actually even thought of myself as an artist, right? And so I think, and this was like back in the day where we didn't even have social media yet. Like it
Mm.
was back when it was all about blogging. And so I would blog, which is a very storytelling
Mm-hmm.
medium, right? You
Yeah.
had to have words. And so that's actually how I started my art business was through, honestly, it was through more art journaling and my art journaling practice and talking about why I was doing it in the first place, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. So I honestly can't remember a time when I wasn't weaving those two things together because my art making was so tied to my personal journey and my story.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that's always the case.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that because everyone comes to art making from a different place, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
That's okay. That actually leads me to something like I would love to hear your opinion on this then, because you are right. Every artist comes from a different place when they're creating art. What would you say? What are activities that could help them facilitate find the answers to like, why am I making art and what is my message about? Because you mentioned blogging. I think that probably initiated more as a business strategy for you, like, okay, I'm going to blog about my art, but it was intrinsically a great exercise for you to talk about art and literally put words to why you were creating or what your art was about.
Okay, ask the question one what.
Okay, yes, sorry, I kind of went around the world. The question is, what would you suggest as activities or questions that for artists to be able to find their art message?
Yeah, so I think that again, it should it should go back to what we've been talking about, which is why are you even making art in the first place,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I don't know, what do you get out of art making? And
Good question.
what what emotion are
Yeah.
you trying to convey through your art process or your art practice? I know that some people are more about, you know, having a sense of peace, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, that might dictate their expression. So they might use more neutral and soothing colors. They might use watercolors to express that, Whereas, my expression and my style is much more bolder and colorful, which brings
Yeah.
joy, which had to do with bringing me out of this depression that I was walking through.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Do you feel like that answers the question?
I think so. I think those are great suggestions. And even not suggestions, those are great questions to ask yourself. Usually, when I'm assisting artists to find their message, those are exactly the questions that I ask. Where one of them is, well, you said one like, what emotion do you want to convey? I usually start with the artist where I'm like, what is the emotion that you feel when you're creating art?
Right.
Is it a form of healing or is it a place of externalizing frustration, like you're angry, and then like, okay, and then trace where that emotion came from? Was it a life event or a dynamic or something? Because when I say frequency breeds familiarity, I often use that for marketing for artists, but that also traces back to understand yourself. What is something that happens recurrently in you that you keep on going back to and you feel familiar with? And usually when you express yourself in art, it's because you're orbiting around a certain topic that is important to you.
Right.
So when you figure out how you feel in creating art and you trace it back to what prompts that feeling, then you're able to consolidate the message of your art, because you're like, there you go. That's what you're talking about, and it starts taking shape and form.
Yeah.
I would
I was
say,
just going to add, because I've experienced several different ways of creating art, that I personally feel like, like I was saying before, when I was, like good at art, I didn't
yeah.
really consider myself an artist, and I didn't really love the process that of doing these pencil drawings. It didn't really excite me. And so I think also one of the clues that you can look for is oftentimes the materials and supplies that you use, but also like the expression that leaning towards. And sometimes even just starting with the art that you're making, you could even potentially ask your audience or people who you're close to, how does this art make you feel? And that might be a clue to the message behind your art. But what I wanted to go back to is, I know that as an artist, I have to get really in tune with what type of expression I really want to communicate through my art, because there are certain things that I almost obsess over as an artist. And I think you have to go back to that place of like, oh my gosh, I have to do this or I'm going to go crazy. Whereas there have been seasons in my life where I've made art just because I could, right? Because like I went through this season where I was doing a lot of like digital illustration. I had taught myself Illustrator and I was making these like cute forest animals. And it wasn't like really a true expression of who I was. And so because of that, I don't know that I would have been able to tell you this is what I'm communicating through this art. Or when I was doing those pencil drawings, like I don't think there was necessarily any message behind that, right? And so I think that sometimes we are scared to even like explore that because I don't know, we keep ourselves from that, or maybe we haven't experienced that yet, right? I don't know. What do you think about that, Sarah?
I think that's why people need to work with you and masterpiece makers or in this style lab, because you're helping people find, I mean, even visually finding your technique. Because, like you said, you can have the technique to do a realistic pencil drawing or even to do like cute, adorable illustrations of animals. But you're right, maybe that's not prompting you to have a deeper message because it's not digging in there. You know, the symbiosis between like a technique and your message, because then when you started using the colors, that you wanted to use, and the impasto like texture and the florals, like that really drew out like your personality and your message.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is literally what you do with other artists. You're helping them draw out their authentic selves through talent.
Right. And I don't think it necessarily comes naturally, or you may have to try lots of different things before you can find that expression
Yeah.
or the thing that really gets you excited, right?
I can relate because when I was in college, when you get an art degree, they're pretty much trying to introduce you to all of these mediums, techniques, and in parallel, you're trying to find your concept. But in college, it was more trying to find your fine art concept, which is very lofty and whatnot, which is not I'm very practical. So that's how I found my message. And I remember you are right. When you find the technique that best expresses yourself and you feel like a wave of joy, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is it. That does help you like to then tap into your message, because I tried, not tried, it was part of the curriculum, to do printmaking, drawing, realistic, the basics of oil painting. And ironically at the time, like I hated oil painting because it's so messy and you had to clean up everything. And it was just like, and then my senior year, I finally had watercolor 101. And as soon as I painted, like with the watercolor, I was like, this is it. Like my senior year. I was like, oh no, I wasted all these years frustrated. Not even that I loved art, but I wasn't finding my message. I was more frustrated with everything that I had to do. And I tapped into watercolor, and I felt that made my art come alive. And removing the frustration that I felt with the other techniques gave space for me to have time to nurture my message. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I think
Right?
it's interesting that we both sort of had that similar journey in that
Yeah.
we both tried a lot of different things, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's when you feel that like something just clicks and you're like, this is it, you know?
Yeah.
And and I think sometimes artists don't give themselves space to
Yeah.
explore lots of different things. And they put a lot of like pressure on themselves. Well, I better figure this out,